Hey guys, and welcome to Should You Buy It, where all we do is talk a little bit about the game and whether or not we think it's worth the cost.
One alone whose story is in their own hands, the Fate Maker.
In this episode, we'll be playing Tiny Tina's Wonderland, the action-packed looter shooter based in a fantasy world where you will play the Fate Maker and be tasked with stopping the evil Dragon Lord.
The first question that we always cover in these videos is what stage of development is the game in? And in this case, Tiny Tina's Wonderland is currently in full release and available on PC as well as most consoles for $60.
So what exactly is the game? Well, Tiny Tina's Wonderland is based on an extremely popular DLC from a previous Borderlands game. The game itself is heavily inspired by D&D, with the fun and interesting twist of playing it in a Borderlands-style game. Tiny Tina's Wonderland brings tons of interesting ideas to the table that traditional Borderlands fans will love. It also will be fun for many D&D fans that enjoy shooting games. The main gameplay takes place in a tabletop style of universe, so rather than simply running from one quest to the next, the player will simply play on top of a D&D table in order to move around the map. The map will change as well based on the story and which elements of it that you complete, and it is also interactive and not only for moving around. For example, every now and then you will encounter some random enemies which you can fight for some XP and rewards.
The story, however, will take place mostly inside instance areas where you will need to complete a main story quest in order to progress your game. Once a main story area is defeated, it will open a new section of the map and allow you to engage with new side quests as well as the next main story quest. In total, there are 10 chapters to the main story, and they each have their own zones associated with them. The story in total took us approximately 12 to 15 hours to complete, but it's going to vary quite widely depending on your difficulty, skill, and how many side quests you're willing to do.
The combat once again will take place inside of these instance zones where you get a very Borderlands-like experience. The selling point, however, of Wonderlands is that instead of grenades, we now have a rechargeable spell slot as well as an ability slot. The spell slot is most similar to a grenade as every class can use every spell in the game, and which spell you use and its traits are decided based on which spell you have in your spell slot. Your ability slot, however, is bound to your class, of which each class holds 2. For an example, the Spore Warden has one ability that shoots a volley of arrows that bounce between enemies, and another that summons icy tornadoes that deal damage and disrupt your foes.
The class system in Wonderland is familiar yet different from its Borderland predecessors. You have a talent tree that you can put points into as you level up throughout the game, as well as a passive that each class is directly associated with. The biggest and most interesting twist, however, is the one that they have pulled right out of the D&D handbook, which is multi-classing. You see, while it's not required, after you get a fair way through the campaign, you'll unlock the ability to multi-class into a second alternative class. You can then choose their spells and their talents to combine both classes for one mean monster shredding machine. Just keep in mind though that your starting class is going to be locked in, while your secondary will be changeable once you reach the endgame.
You see, the endgame in Tiny Tina's Wonderland currently revolves around the Chaos Chamber. The Chaos Chamber is very similar to Greater Rifts in Diablo 3 if you've happened to play that game before. You see, you will be dropped into arenas where you must fight off random types of enemies. After defeating a certain amount, it will allow you to move on to the next stage in which you will repeat this process. However, along the way you will fight a mini-boss, and at the very end you will fight one of the main bosses, which can be the main bosses you have fought throughout the campaign. Throughout the Chaos Chamber, however, you will have to make important decisions that will decide whether or not you will be storing up loot for the end of the run, creating a more difficult challenge for enhanced rewards, and whether or not you want to spend the currency you're gaining on different buffs or save it for more loot at the end.
They then take the endgame a step further with Chaos Trials, which are a tier of difficulty up from the hardest difficulty of a Chaos dungeon that you were currently able to do. If you do manage to complete that Chaos Trial run, you will then be awarded the ability to repeat the difficulty in exchange for more crystals during your run and thus more buffs and loot throughout it. There is also a side leveling system called Myth Rank, which essentially allows you to keep making minor increases to your character past level 40. Then just to give you that little bit of icing on the cake, there are tons of rewards, collectibles, and side quests that you can do if you didn't complete them in the campaign earlier. If you didn't complete them earlier, this is how you'll be able to go back and get 100% completion of the game.
Now, before we move into the pros and cons section for this video, if you would like to freely support this channel and you do decide to purchase this game or any other games on the Epic Games Store, please consider using our creator code, which is GA1 during checkout, as it really helps us to bring you guys all this great content. With that being said, first up for the pros is that the comedy in the game was amazing. I never got tired of hearing, combination of D&D and Borderlands style of humor will keep you laughing throughout the entire campaign. Next up is that Wonderlands offers plenty of meaningful things to do at the endgame. Alongside the Chaos Chamber and Trials, there are plenty of good reasons to go back and complete the many different collectibles and side quests throughout the game. This is because things like collecting loot dice will permanently increase your loot luck, which is your chance to find more rare items. Another pro is that the combat felt extremely smooth and well polished. Every time you engage in combat, it always felt fluid and impactful, whereas each time you cast a spell, it felt meaningful to the fight and can turn sometimes what felt like losing battles instantly into winning battles. And lastly for the pros was that some builds just felt overpowered, but in a good way. Just to give you an example of what we're talking about here, there was one weapon that we found that made it so when you reloaded your gun, it would turn into a flying gun that would continue to shoot your enemies before dive bombing and exploding. The reason this felt overpowered was because the character build that I had been going with revolved around stealing life, and since the weapon stole more life, it allowed me to stay into my ultimate state for a longer period of time. Therefore, it felt OP not because the item was broken, but because I built my character around it.
Now for the cons. First up is that there's currently some weird yet really minor bugs. It's hard to really break all of these down for you as everybody has experienced different ones. Just to give you an example of something we experienced, there was one situation where our teammates were showing that they were dead on the bottom left hand of the screen. However, they were perfectly fine, alive, and running around and shooting things. Again, I think these are mostly server issues and will mostly be polished out pretty quickly, but it's just worth noting because it might still be in the game if you decide to pick this game up. And last for our cons is that if you know absolutely nothing about D&D, you're just going to miss some of the jokes or they just won't hit the same. I do still think there are plenty of jokes that are funny, but it is really unfortunate that some of the jokes just require you to have previous knowledge of how the game of D&D actually works.
So now here we are for the rating for the game, and when we rate games, we want to get 1 hour of enjoyment out of every $1 that we spend on the game. So for this game in particular, in Tiny Tina's Wonderland, we would want to get roughly 60 hours of enjoyment out of the $60 that we spent. And after putting over 24 played hours into this game, we give it 9 out of 10 potatoes.
Tiny Tina's Wonderland was easily one of the single most fun experiences that we've had in a video game in quite some time. It's fun, it's fast-paced, it's progression-oriented, and delivers on everything that it's promised. It takes everything that makes Borderlands great, then puts it together into a D&D role-playing style of a game. Yes, Tiny Tina's does currently have some bugs, however, these are expected with a newly launched game in the first few days. Therefore, if you like first-person shooter games in the fantasy genre, or simply just like Borderlands in general, then I feel it is safe to say that Tiny Tina's Wonderland is without a doubt worth the cost.
Before you guys go, thank you so much for watching, and if you did enjoy the video, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe for more gaming content. A big shout out to all of our members and subscribers, and don't forget to consider using our creator code GA1 in the Epic Games Store to freely support the channel. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.